Hollywood Heights, a neighborhood that just keeps on going and going and going, and we should too. Four different streets make up this intersection, high up in Hollywood Heights. The house on the other side of that brown fence, built in 1956, marks the end of Paramount Drive. And after we see this house, nestled behind these really fantastic tall trees, we'll be able to check Camrose Drive off the list. You will have then seen every single house on both of those streets. And this is a really great corner property, and as we descend down Hillcrest Road in a minute, you'll realize just how great of a view they must have here. It's a 3,400 square foot house with 4 bedrooms, built in 1948, and it was once home to the all-American Fisher family. Charles Fisher, he ran a hardware store in the San Fernando Valley, the Roscoe Hardware Company, about a half-hour drive from his home here. Mrs. Fisher, Lorraine, she was an active member in the community, charming as pie. They had a son named Rick, who in 1955 was sent off to Idaho, where he planned a fabulous summer of horseback riding. Neighbors, they had every reason to smile and wave at the Fishers, till things got a little awkward in 1959 when Charles was one of a dozen men indicted by a grand jury for embezzlement in a case that involved $1 million missing from the Sun Valley National Bank. And I'm not entirely sure just how Charles was thought to be directly involved, and frankly, I don't care. If you want to put me to sleep, start discussing embezzlement, fraud, laundering, tax evasion. I mean, Yawnsville. I don't have any interest in those kinds of stories or court cases. Give me the Hightower jewel thieves and get out of here with embezzlement. But I do know that the charges against Charles were dismissed in 1960, and the following year, he was elected president of a new organization called the Sun Valley Optimist Club, which focused on youth development. He was now appearing in the papers for the good work that he was doing, and good for him, turning over a new leaf and making a difference. Neighbors were finally able to wave and smile at the Fishers again. Charles, he died in 1970, and Lorraine the following year. Little Rick, he made it to the turn of the century, dying in 2000 at the age of 57. We'll visit Sycamore Avenue a little later, but first we're gonna head south down Hillcrest Road, beginning with probably my favorite story on this street, mostly because I just loved him so much. The white Mediterranean-style house in front of us, built in 1926, became the very first place that Patrick Swayze lived when he moved to LA to become a star. After staying in a seedy motel for their first few nights in town, he and his wife Lisa, both dancers, rented this place from a lesbian couple who owned it. I actually talk a lot about him in my Dirty Dancing tour, so check that out if you want to know more. But come on, not just Dirty Dancing. Ghost, Point Break, To Wong Fu, Donnie Darko, Roadhouse. The man, he just made some brilliant films, and I cannot believe how long ago he passed away. 2009. Just kind of seems like yesterday. And I love that he was born Patrick Swayze. Sounds like a stage name, but it wasn't. His choreographer, dance teacher mother named him that when she gave birth to him on August 18th, 1952 in Houston, Texas. It was because of her that he was introduced to the entire world of dance. Ice skating, ballet, all very early. He became exceptionally skilled at it, hence his brilliant work in Dirty Dancing, but he was also a dude in Texas, so football and sports obviously played a major role in his life. He was at a crossroads in which direction to go professionally when a knee injury intervened, making the decision to go to New York in 1972 to pursue theater much, much easier. He didn't go alone. He went with his childhood sweetheart, Lisa. The two met as teenagers, taking dance lessons from Patrick's mother. They eventually wed in 1975 and were married for 34 years until she became his widow. In 1977, 5 years after being in New York City, Patrick landed the role of Danny Zuko in the long-running production of Grease. Didn't make him a star, but it landed him an agent, and he decided to give Hollywood a shot. Lisa and Patrick packed everything up and took a gamble on this place called Hollywood.
We managed to find a really nice apartment for cheap in the Hollywood Hills, in the lower half of a house owned by two women. It had a kind of bohemian glamour, and because it was built on a hillside, we had a fabulous view of Hollywood. And the women upstairs were real characters, and one of them seemed always to have a tumbler of scotch in her hand. Lisa and I both loved the apartment, but now we just had to find some work to pay the $500 a month rent. We had a total of $2,000, which had to last until we got work. Our $2,000 was going fast. Between staying those nights at the Serra and paying first and last month's rent at our new place and eating, we were just about broke. At night, I'd drive up to a spot on Mulholland Drive that had a beautiful panoramic view of Los Angeles, and I'd sit there looking out over the lights of Hollywood and say, I am going to conquer you. It was like a ritual every night, a way to gear myself up for the fight ahead. If I was going to make it in Hollywood, I had to really believe I could do it.
I've mentioned this before, that a lot of houses in the Hollywood Hills have kind of confusing addresses. While their house here is technically on Hillcrest, Patrick and Lisa, they park down here on Paseo del Serra, a tiny cul-de-sac with a few homes nestled within the hills of Hollywood Heights. And while this neighborhood might seem really fancy, keep in mind that a lot of these homes, like this one, are multifamily units, and some of these people are renters. Patrick and Lisa, they were renters, and they really struggled to make the ends meet. Patrick's first few gigs in town, they barely paid the rent. He had a small part in a movie called Skate Town, USA, a roller disco movie. I think they should bring those back. He also had another small part in a TV movie starring John Ritter called The Comeback Kid. And he also did one episode on the wildly successful show MASH, a role that he was actually very proud of. He also did theater too. It wasn't quite Broadway, but he did perform in a play called The Brick and the Rose in Hollywood on Santa Monica Boulevard. But to make money, he and Lisa, they started a carpentry business, a skill that Patrick picked up while growing up in Texas. And my favorite thing about their business is that one of their very first clients was a former dance student of Patrick's mom, an actress who would also leave Houston for Hollywood and who would also hit it big. Jacqueline Smith. She was writing the Charlie's Angels juggernaut at the time and hired Patrick and Lisa to redo her kitchen. It was really jobs like this that kept Patrick and Lisa afloat in those early years, and Patrick would even stay friends with Jacqueline up until the end of his life. Eventually, though, Patrick and Lisa, they got their own apartment in West Hollywood, and in 1982, Patrick got that call that every actor fantasizes about. He was about to join a cast of soon-to-be absolute superstars in Francis Ford Coppola's The Outsiders, a film that would change the course of his life and career. Speaking of Jacqueline Smith, her Charlie's Angels co-star of 3 seasons, Kate Jackson, she went on to star in her own show called Scarecrow and Mrs. King, and on it, her mother was played by an actress named Beverly Garland for all 4 seasons that show ran, from 1983 to 1987. And she lived in this greenish blue-colored house. And, there are actors in Hollywood who sometimes become stars no matter what their resume looks like. They're just stars. Then there are actors who work and work and work, but never really become stars. And that's kind of what I think about Beverly Garland. Despite that, she has her own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She's just got a name that's like a cross between, Beverly Hills and Judy Garland. So you're like, wait, yeah, I know her. No, wait, do I? I should. But if you do think you know her name, it's probably for the hotel named for her about 10 minutes away from here in North Hollywood, the Beverly Garland Hotel. But before that, 25-year-old Beverly Fessenden from Santa Cruz married a 24-year-old actor named Richard Garland in 1951. And the newlyweds moved right into this house following their wedding. Beverly took his last name, and despite the fact that they were only married for 2 years, she kept his last name for the rest of her life. Her career had actually kicked off shortly after she moved in here, and she worked continuously through the decades, just racking up a mile-long resume. But again, nothing ever really broke her out as a star. However, she is someone you've most likely seen in something at some point in your life. Roger Corman fans will remember her from a few of his cult classic films, which she made a few years after she moved out of this house. She did a lot of guest spots on television in the 60s and 70s, eventually landing a 74-episode gig as Fred MacMurray's new wife on the last 3 seasons of My 3 Sons. Lots more work followed. In the 1990s, she did an episode of Friends, a handful of Lois and Clark, 9 episodes of Seventh Heaven, and she even did over 50 episodes of Port Charles beginning in 2000. But it was in the early 1970s when she and her second husband built a 255-room Spanish Mission-style hotel on 7 acres in North Hollywood, right near the Studio City border. In 1993, it was renamed the Beverly Garland Holiday Inn. Beverly, she passed away from natural causes at the age of 82 in 2008, at which point her son took over the hotel, and after a $20 million renovation in 2015, the boutique hotel is now simply called the Garland. Beverly Garland was not the only actress to live here. The house was actually built in 1932 by a silent film actress named Nell Keller. And I don't mean she had it built, I mean she built the house. As in, climbed the ladder, sawed the lumber, pounded the nails into the wood. She even drew up blueprints before having them professionally altered. The newspapers, they couldn't believe it because she was a woman, but yeah, she raved about the project, told them that building this house actually cured her insomnia. After working throughout the daylight hours, she'd come home, flop down on her bed, and pass out each night, and also added that all the hard physical work allowed her to eat whatever she wanted. Now, she did have labor workers and a carpenter at her side, but she worked right there alongside everyone, and I have to say, there's something really remarkable about standing out here in front of it. I love that it's still here. The newspaper actually printed a photo of it when it was almost complete, and aside from this fence that was added very recently, it almost looks the exact same. No, she wasn't a star by any means. She only worked in a few pictures, early pictures, like the 19-teens. By the early 20s, she was done with the movies. She was married to an artist named Edgar. He had some minor success with paintings, but the two of them, like many actors, had side hustles. Like in 1923, when they both helped design a new French restaurant opening on Cahuenga Boulevard in Hollywood, just a block away from where a young Carol Burnett would eventually move. No, she may have given up a movie career, but that did not mean she wasn't a true actress. She actually appeared in several plays throughout the 1920s and 30s, taking all sorts of roles, big and small. She and Edgar, they always dreamed of building their dream house in the Hollywood Hills, but unfortunately he passed away in 1932 at the age of 64. That's actually what kicked Nell, then 56, into house building gear. She got to enjoy living in her own creation for several years, all through the 30s and 40s, before it became home to Beverly Garland. Nell, she eventually moved in with a niece of hers before passing away in 1965 at the age of 89. The following year, in 1966, yeah, we're not done yet. Some really crazy shit went down in this house. Steve Kalstead was living here when two of his pets escaped through an open window. Avok and Solaris. They weren't dogs, not even cats. They were baboons. Steve had two pet baboons. And since they escaped on a Friday, the Griffith Park veterinarian sent to tranquilize the baboons couldn't make it out here until Sunday. So for 2 days, Avok and Solaris swung and bounced and jumped from roof to roof and tree to tree all around here, living it up. They were eventually caught and returned here to their home. Not a zoo, but here. Steve and the baboons only lasted a couple years, and then it was time for Julie Meredith and Serra Cunningham to move in. In 1968, the two ladies were arrested right here in the home and charged with witchcraft, which was illegal. I heard it. They were telling people's fortunes here, and from the photo that I saw in the newspaper, it looks like they were doing tarot readings, perhaps. Serra said in the courtroom that witchcraft is just a religion, acknowledging a nameless god and attuning a person's mind with psychic powers. Well, the judge didn't care for that and convicted them of fortune-telling. They were both instructed to pay $35 in fines, but I hope they put a spell on that silly old judge. Poor Mrs. Betty Andrews. In 1957, she found herself a widow after her 45-year-old husband, an assistant director named Roger M. Andrews, passed away while living in this yellow house tucked back in the corner. He went by RM, and he worked for one straight decade as an assistant director on films like Top Gun, Superman, and Batman and Robin. Not the ones you're thinking of, though. These three all came out during the 10 years he worked from 1948 to 1958. His Top Gun didn't have Tom Cruise, but it did have whiskey, women, and guns. His movies, they're all pretty forgotten, aside from the avid film buff, but his resume of action westerns and comic book adaptations indicate that he probably would have crushed it in today's world of Marvel movies and superhero flicks. most modern house on Hillcrest, built in 2019. I like this one. It's kind of subtle. Sits right next to a multi-unit building from 1967, but it's the one across the street that we're going to talk about next. This 1,800 square footer on the right was built in 1915, and shockingly, it's not even the oldest house on this street. And how about this? The very first family to live here lived here for over 30 years. The Bowens. And boy, they would have just loved social media because their family drama played out in the newspapers all throughout the years for the world to read. Starting in 1919, when Mrs. Bowen, Elizabeth, went to the hospital to visit her friend Rosa, who had just tried to commit suicide by inhaling gas. When she got there, she told the doctors, yeah, this is like her third time trying this. She's literally insane. And the doctors were like, oh, okay then, well, we'll just take her to the psych ward and she probably won't recover. Imagine, though, if Rosa was like, oh my God, Elizabeth, I just tripped over the gas line in the kitchen. Relax, I wasn't inhaling gas. Poor Rosa. Then, just 4 years after having her friend committed, Elizabeth, this is wild, she went to pay her husband Howard a surprise visit at the printing shop that he ran down on Highland Avenue, and she found him passed out, unconscious, on the floor from, guess what? Gas leaking from a broken connection. Well, she just went on exclaiming that she saved his life, and the newspapers hailed her a hero. Didn't have him committed to the loony bin. Apparently, it took 45 minutes for the paramedics to resuscitate him. I feel like in his case, though, he was like, God damn it, Elizabeth, of all the days to surprise me. No, I'm sure it was an accident. Later, in 1928, Howard and Elizabeth, they bragged to the world that their son Kenneth had graduated from Hollywood High and would now be playing halfback on the football team at the New Jersey prep school he would soon be attending. And let's not forget their daughter Dorothea, who in 1929 made the newspapers simply for transitioning from dance student to dance teacher because she was just that great of a dancer. The Bowens, they were really proud of their children and just as proud of their 50-year marriage. They had a really big party to celebrate the occasion in 1947. By now their kids were married with children of their own, giving Howard and Elizabeth grandchildren. The newspaper, they credited the Bowens as being pioneers of Hollywood who were both very active in the community. They didn't, however, make it much past their 50th. Elizabeth, she died right here in this house the following year in 1949 at the age of 78. Howard, he went on to live another 9 years, dying at the age of 83 in 1958. After the kids were grown, the Bowens, they converted this house into a duplex. You can see the B on the green door there. They rented out the lower half, and in 1930, their tenant was a world-famous director and actor with just a great first name, King, but a terrible last name, a little too close to a hate slur, Baggot, King Baggot. He has a star on the Walk of Fame, and every time I walk by it, it's like, ooh. But wow, was he famous. He was actually born William King Baggot in St. Louis in 1879 and was considered at one point the most photographed man in the world. Seriously, he was such a big star. They actually coined the term leading man because of him. He acted in over, I think it was 300 films from 1909 until around 1947. Not only that, but he wrote close to 20 screenplays. A super talented man with a severe alcohol problem. It's what caused his wife Ruth to file for divorce, stating that he was a terrible influence on their son. King, he moved out of the family home and into the lower unit here while he went through his highly publicized and extremely messy divorce. His career suffered too. His drinking got so bad that he really couldn't be hired, and he eventually was reduced to taking bit parts and sometimes even extra work, background work. That had to be humiliating. Imagine going from star to an extra. Ooh, it obviously had a major impact on his health, too, because he eventually died in a sanitarium at the age of 68 on July 11th, 1948. We're only going a couple feet to the house next door, but we are completely changing vibes with a story about a super cool 70s star who lived in this duplex built in 1930. His name was David Soul, and while his name might not ring a bell, you'll definitely know his acting and maybe even his singing. He was born on August 28, 1943 in Chicago and moved all over with his family. At one point, they were living in Mexico, where he learned to play the guitar. He was in love with acting, specifically stage work, as well as singing. He tried his hand at both, heading to New York City, where in the mid-1960s, he decided he wanted to be known as the Covered Man. Long before Sia did her little face-hiding stunts, David tried it. He wore a mask and sent audition tapes all over, stating that his name was David Soul and that he wanted to be known only for his singing voice. Well, the William Morris Agency bit. They signed him sight unseen, and he got booked on TV shows like The Merv Griffin Show.
I am the covered man.
Many girls and many guys complain that life is such a task. They don't seem to realize in many ways they wear a mask. And that's why I hide my face, 'cause I'm a man who has to be free.
People liked the stunt, but his singing career, it didn't really take off. He stuck to this gag for 4 months, though, never revealing his face, until the hype died down. Then he appeared on Merv's show a few more times, this time with the mask off, and it got him the attention of agents and producers who put him to work as an actor in the late 1960s. It was slow at first, small parts on shows like I Dream of Jeannie, Flipper, and he even did an episode of Star Trek. By the 1970s, he was living here in this house and was fully committed to his acting career. He did more guest spots. He appeared on an episode of All in the Family. He did The Rookie, another show starring Kate Jackson. And speaking of, in 1975, Aaron Spelling decided to cast David in a life-changing role. He would play the part of Ken Hutch Hutchinson on the hit TV show Starsky and Hutch from 1975 to 1979. And ironically, once he became a household name and face, his singing career took off. He released a few albums in the 1970s and found success in 1977 with the hit song Don't Give Up on Us. It charted all the way to #1 here in the States, as well as in Europe. Unfortunately, it was his only hit, but it does often appear on those greatest one-hit wonder lists. David eventually moved to the UK in the 90s, where he dedicated his life to animal rights and stage acting. He did a lot of theater and appeared on British television. But in 2004, director Todd Phillips called David for a cameo in his film version of Starsky and Hutch, starring Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson. There's actually a great scene in the movie where Owen Wilson, as Hutch, starts singing a song in the elevator, and it's David's Don't Give Up on Us, Baby. David, he was one of those really cool cat 70s types, smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day. It eventually caught up with him, though, and he died of cancer just recently on January 4th, 2024 in London. He was 80 years old. So it's actually a duplex. It was built in 1930, and the upper unit, the penthouse, if you will, was where David Soul lived. And I just learned from a neighbor lady who lives on this street, not here, but nearby. She told me that Harrison Ford's son used to live in the top unit. I think he has a handful of sons, so I'm not sure which one or when, but that's all according to her. She was actually like, oh, who are you and why are you filming on my street? But when I told her what I was doing, she just spilled. Started telling me all about the neighbors around here. It was great. But anyway, there's an extra little tidbit about 2001 Hillcrest Road from one of the neighbors. Just a reminder that most of these houses are on Zillow or Redfin if you want to Google them to see what they look like inside. But back on the other side of the street, right next to the 1967 building, is a house built in 1912. It has 2,100 square feet, 3 bedrooms, and just exquisite views. And one of the very first people to live here was Eva Tanguay. And if you went back in time and told anyone from the early 1900s that one day, over 100 years from now, the only way you'll ever hear or see Eva again is on some random YouTube channel, nobody would believe you. Well, first of all, they'd have no idea what you were talking about, but it would have been unfathomable to them that there would be a time when she just wasn't famous anymore. Eva Tanguay, she was the most famous celebrity in the world at one point. She was the queen of vaudeville. In fact, she gets credited as the reason vaudeville was even famous. And the truth is, she wasn't even really that talented. She couldn't really sing, couldn't dance well, but she used that to her advantage and she sang about it. Her biggest song, it was called I Don't Care, in which she actually sang about not caring what people thought about her or how she looked. She caused an absolute sensation with it. The song went on to be recorded by Judy Garland and Julie Andrews. Britney Spears even sang it on Star Search, but back in 1904, when it was written specifically for her, Eva brought a style to it, a humor, a personality that just caused hysteria. She didn't just sell out venues, people had to be turned away in droves. She was ahead of her time in the sense that she was really famous for her personality. She was hilarious, they called her wild and zany, she was fun. She really knew how to work a crowd like nobody else, and she's also sometimes credited as being the first American superstar because, well, see, at that time, before movies came along, stage stars, vaudeville stars, they would be written about, but usually in newspapers from their region, about their performances. With Eva, however, newspapers from all around the country started writing about her personal life, where she was spotted, what she was doing, really superseded her so-called talents, and the news stories became about her. At the height of her fame, around 1910, she was earning $3,500 a week, which is close to about $120,000 a week today. Eva lived in this house in the late teens through about 1920, 1921. She was in her late 30s, and that is pretty much all that the press could focus on, her age. Every time she had a birthday, it was like breaking news that she was getting older, and each news story was about her declining fame and her poor health. Things only got worse in 1929 when she lost over $2 million in the very infamous stock market crash of 1929. She never recovered from that loss, and the papers, again, were constantly printing stories that the legend was on her deathbed. That went on for years and years, but eventually she was, and on January 11th, 1947, she passed away at the age of 68. The newspapers, they got one last go at her when it was revealed that she had died broke and penniless. A few years later, in 1953, 20th Century Fox released a movie based on her life. It starred Mitzi Gaynor as Eva, and it was fittingly called The I Don't Care Girl.
But I don't care. They may or may not be friends, but I care less. You see, I'm short and independent, and all the clever race descendant, and my star is indeed sentient, and that's why I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. What they may think of me. I'm happy, good lucky, men think that I'm lucky. I'm happy and carefree. I don't care, I don't care. If I should get free, don't despair. And no one can take me by calling me crazy, 'cause I
Eva had moved out of here before losing all of her money, and in 1928, Mrs. D.E. Locke was now enjoying the amazing views. She loved throwing dinner parties, and in one instance, she informed the press that a great deal of fun was had by all when one of her guests, Captain John McCabe of the U.S. Air Force, provided not just humorous stories about his life in the military, but the tragic ones as well. How fun. Oh, and a Texas ranch hand was on hand to tell all about the dudes from the dude ranches he worked on. I wonder what that was about. But how about this? Just a few months after Eva Tanguay passed away, not too far from here, the papers reported that a newlywed couple was moving into this home. The bride was Wyn Ritchie. She was 47 years old and had spent her life as a wardrobe mistress, as they were referred to back then, on several Charlie Chaplin films. And as a result, Wyn appeared in several crowd scenes whenever needed in giant Chaplin hits like The Circus, The Great Dictator, Modern Times, and City Lights, all the big classics. And her new husband was Wyn Evans, then 32 years old, and he was just starting to make it in show business. He was a songwriter-lyricist who, along with his writing partner, Jay Livingston, whom he met in college, would go on to have just an incredible career. The year he and his new wife moved in here, he and Jay won the Best Song Oscar for Buttons and Bows, the theme song to the movie The Paleface, starring Jane Russell and Bob Hope. 2 years later, in 1949, they won another Best Song Oscar, this time for the song Mona Lisa, made famous by Nat King Cole, of course. That was for an Alan Ladd movie called Captain Carey USA. They weren't done winning Oscars, though. They accepted their third Oscar for the 1956 song Que Sera, Sera, made famous by Doris Day for the Alfred Hitchcock film The Man Who Knew Too Much. They were also nominated for another song made famous by Doris called Tammy from the movie Tammy and the Bachelor from the following year. Ray, he actually wrote over 700 songs, and I am about to name every single one of them, so buckle up. No, kidding, but I will tell you that in addition to their film work, Ray, along with Jay, also wrote the theme songs to Mr. Ed and Bonanza, among others. And here's some really funny trivia about Ray. He was raised Jewish, but probably his most well-known song, definitely the one that's played the most, is Silver Bells. Yeah, the Christmas classic. It was actually written for a 1951 movie called The Lemon Drop Kid, starring Bob Hope. But I'll leave you with my favorite tidbit about Mr. Evans, and that is that he and Jay Livingston both appeared as themselves in the New Year's Eve party scene in one of my all-time favorite films, the perfect masterpiece, 1950's Sunset Boulevard. Ray and Wyn, they were married for 56 years, right up until she passed away on April 11, 2003, at the age of 102. Ray, he lived another 4 years, dying at the age of 92 on February 15th, 2007. And Ray, he has a star on the Walk of Fame. He's in the Songwriters Hall of Fame. He's won tons of awards. And it's kind of ironic that two people on complete opposite ends of the talent/fame spectrum, Ray Evans and Eva Tanguay, both lived in the same house. Before Mr. Evans was making hit music next door, the Thompson family was living here in this house, built in 1932. And 5 years later, both Mr. Thompson and his 8-year-old son Eric both made the newspapers, and both for terrible reasons. Little Eric and two of his young friends, they got their hands on a .22 caliber rifle. His friends were like 5 or 6 or 4, something crazy like that, and they hurt themselves when they shot at a rock that split off, ricocheting and hitting each one of the kids. They were okay, minor injuries, but poor Mr. Thompson, keen he wasn't. He shortly contracted pneumonia after the incident and passed away about a month later. Keen, he had been a writer in Hollywood from 1920 up until his death at the age of 51. He had written several short stories and screenplays for films that are mostly forgotten. I think Clara Bow and Gary Cooper starred in a couple of them. But he had been employed as a writer on the Paramount Studio writing staff for 12 years when he passed. And his little gun-playing son Eric lived to be 71, passing away in 2003. And I'm happy to report that it wasn't from anything gun-related. This craftsman-style house right next to the Thompsons is actually the oldest house on Hillcrest. It was built in 1910. It's been restored quite beautifully, too. There are actually 2 houses on the property. The other one we can't see. It's up behind the house, and it goes all the way down to Glencoe Way, which is now the street directly below us, behind us. There's a really nice garden in between both homes, too. And the man who lived here in the 1930s bought 25 acres of undeveloped land in the Cahuenga Pass for the purpose of building and selling homes. So I imagine that he must have made quite a killing. And if you want to live next door, this 3-bedroom house built in 1917, which has also been restored, is for sale and can be yours if you have a little over $3 million to spend. I will say, though, that it does have a large pool. And, you know, there are pools in this neighborhood, but it's not as common to have one in this neighborhood as it is for most areas in LA. There just isn't enough flat land to build a pool, but this house, it really has a nice large one. You know, for a row of very, very old houses, I mean, this restored one was also built in 1917, there just aren't a lot of stories. For the most part, the people who have lived here over the years have been pretty quiet and pretty private. However, we do have a case of a missing pastor with this one. 80-year-old Reverend E.B. Edmonds was visiting his son James, who lived here in 1918. The Reverend, he walked out the front door, said he was heading to the First Baptist Church of Hollywood, which, by the way, still exists on Selma Avenue, and he was never seen or heard from again. Literally disappeared without any sort of trace. We're back up the hill a little bit just so we can see the other side of Hillcrest. And that tall white building out there, you could actually see it when we were closer to it down on Paseo del Serra. It's the Lowe's Hotel down at Highland and Hollywood Boulevard. It's connected to the Ovation, where the Dolby Theater is, where the Oscars, and so many other things are. But up here on Hillcrest, we've got the parking spots for the few homes that are built down into the hill there. And it's really a shame that we can't see just how charming some of these homes really are. 1977 Hillcrest here was built in 1932, and 6 years later, Dr. Mary Duncan Carter was starting her own radio show, which she had for 4 years. Talk about fitting in today. Her radio show was just her reviewing movies, like a podcast. She'd go see whatever was current that week and then would report about them to whoever would listen. Mary was broadcast on about 25 different stations, and she called her show the Film Book Club of the Air. Her day job, though, the one that paid her bills here, was director of the library at USC. She was also very active in book drives and organizing them all over town. In 1945, she was sent to Cairo, Egypt, to develop a library branch there that would house information pertaining to the war. She spent 5 years opening libraries throughout the Middle East. She eventually moved to Canada, but her love and passion for books and libraries stemmed from her strong belief that the pen is mightier than the sword. There are actually a few units down there, and one of them was home to Mrs. Wyland J.D. And speaking of Selma Avenue, if you saw my story location tour on Carol Burnett, you saw Selma Avenue Elementary School. Well, you actually saw the second version of that school, as the first building was destroyed in the 1950s. Well, Wyland was living here when she was the head of a parent group protesting the whereabouts of the temporary locations that the students would be housed at while the demolition and construction of the new school were being completed. That's all I have. It's not a great story. It's not a fun story. I just thought it was a good opportunity to plug my Carol Burnett story for the 800th time. Poor Eleanor Fisher. She was living here at 1973, another house that goes down the hill behind the fence here. And I should probably mention that she was 27 and very pretty because the newspapers mentioned it. She apparently just couldn't handle her husband's commentary on her cooking anymore and decided to put a permanent end to it all. But not the end that you would think. The whole story, it's very suspicious. Apparently, Mr. Fisher, James, an executive in the movie business, was sitting at the kitchen table here at the house with an automobile salesman in 1931 when Ellen brought dinner, a burnt steak and peas to the table, and James claims he made a joke about it, but that she was upset and said, "If you don't take that back, I'm going to go kill myself." And James, again, apparently joking, said, "Well, go ahead and do it then." So she went into the other room and did. She shot herself. Or maybe that's how it was supposed to look. I don't know. I feel like back in the 30s, the cops could be like, "What happened here?" And a husband could say, "I don't know. It was the strangest thing. My wife got upset and went and killed herself." And the cops would be like, "Oh, okay. That settles it. Case solved." I don't know. The whole thing's so strange. If we were standing out here together in the summer of 1929, we would be able to see a 14-room house with a 4-room apartment over the garage. It had been the former home of a prominent movie director, according to a newspaper ad for the house's upcoming auction. It was being described as a perfect property to convert into a hotel or apartments, and that's exactly what happened to it. The original building, it's still back there, but there's a new building which was added around 1938, and I think that's when they started calling it the Chateau Hillcrest. However, after the auction, it became known as the Kismet Gardens, a sort of venue, a place for people to host tea parties and luncheons. They even had a small stage for performances. Didn't last very long, though, and after that new addition in 1938, it became apartments. There's a total of 9 units back there, and I think for the most part, I believe that both buildings are really well preserved in sort of a fairy tale setting. I really don't know for sure. I actually haven't been back there since that prominent film director invited me to one of his dinner parties in 1928, so I just can't say for sure, but from the photos I've seen online, it does look quite beautiful, although very hidden and private, as we can see by the giant gate and the huge hedges that were built to cover it all. All sorts of creative types have lived back here throughout the years. In 1947, friends of Connie McClurd Bryant were saddened to learn that she was seriously ill with a bedside nurse inside of her apartment here. She was a poet who was evidently well known in the Hollywood poetry circle. And there have been numerous actors and writers who have lived here. Some worked, some didn't. Then there were even massive stars. Well, they didn't live here, but Ingrid Bergman, Joan Fontaine, Gary Cooper, and a handful of other giant stars visited these apartments for one particular man, one of Hollywood's favorite men who was a tenant here, and he entertained all of his showbiz friends. And he had a lot. I mean, he was a French chef, so how could he not? Georges Francois Armand Jomier. He arrived from France to Hollywood in the spring of 1908, and he devoted his life to, teaching the French ways to Hollywood. He worked as a technical advisor on films, he taught the language, and most important of all, he taught cooking. He died in the summer of 1950 while living here. He was 75. There is another violinist on the Hollywood Heights tour who had some bad luck while living here. Elliot Fisher, he was a tenant in June of 1949 when his parked car was stolen outside of a friend's house a few miles away in Los Feliz. The car was recovered, but unfortunately, Elliot's, and wait for it, $50,000 violin was not. Hard to believe he just left a $50,000 violin in the car, especially considering it was an original Stradivarius violin, made by Antonio Stradivari himself in 1714. Elliot got it at auction from the estate of a collector in New York, and he had several shows booked and was devastated, saying that although he was going to be sent a replacement violin from his agent, he wasn't certain he'd be able to play on a replacement. He said that each violin had its own personality and that you have to know the personality of your violin to be able to play it. Well, he went on to play on a replacement, but miraculously, his original was found in 1954. It apparently passed through quite a few hands before ending up in Oakland, California. A school teacher and a train switch operator were eventually charged with the theft, and, I don't even know if Elliot got it back or not. Apparently, he was given $55,000 by his insurance company after the theft, and now they wanted the money back. The papers reported that Elliot wanted the Stradivarius back, but wasn't sure he could afford it. He was going to ask his family for a loan, and you know what? The papers never followed up. So we are just going to have to wonder if Elliot ever got his hands on the Stradivarius again. Also that year, his new wife of 7 months, Lizette, filed for divorce, and worst of all, she wanted custody of their little chihuahua, Ricky. They even went to court over it, and Lizette won. Poor Elliot, he wanted the dog, but instead, he got his ailing mother, who moved in here with him. He continued to perform and work and record. With the success of the Bond movies, Elliot cashed in on the popular music and recorded an album of themes that he conducted with his orchestra. It was released in 1966, and I've actually listened to the entire album. It's on YouTube. It's great. In 1973, Elliot appeared on an episode of What's My Line, the game show where a panel has to guess your occupation. He was on it for designing and inventing a particular type of electric violin. 3 years later, in 1976, he released another album called In the Land of Make-Believe, which is a funky, unique jazz album. But sadly, he died 2 years later in 1978 at the age of 53. So that neighbor who I talked to a few minutes ago, the one who gave me all the gossip on the neighborhood, told me that this house across the street from the Chateau Hillcrest is now the home of a very current and famous star. However, I am not going to say who because, well, I'm not TMZ and I respect people's privacy. I would actually tell you if it was public knowledge or if it had appeared anywhere in the press before, but it hasn't. And also, I'm going off of what a neighbor told me, so I don't really have much proof. I'll just say that she starred in a TV show a few years ago and has 2 movies out this year that she's starring in. And you're probably thinking, why would you even mention it if you're not going to tell us? Because I just want you to know that while I always talk about the history of these neighborhoods, it's still a very current and desirable neighborhood to the Hollywood of today. Now, you might start to recognize this area because we did see a glimpse of it earlier when we were completing the Glencoe Way portion of the tour, because Glencoe Way dead ends right into Hillcrest. I already talked about this White House, but look right above it. You can see the Chateau Hillcrest peeking out. That's the newer building, the one built in 1938. And while Glencoe Way dead ends, Hillcrest keeps going. And of course, you know we're going to cover it all because, and I know that I sound like a broken record, but there is just still so much more to see of this incredible neighborhood called Hollywood Heights.